Some people need 10 whole years just to return to the place they once left, not to rekindle an old love, but to find themselves among the ruins of what used to be. A man returns to a small town in Montana, where the lavender fields are still as purple as the day he left, and where the woman he once walked away from now lives with 2 children, both with eyes just like his. This story has no heroes, only people learning how to love again after learning what it means to lose. If you believe that true love never really disappears, it just loses its way for a while, then come with me through After 10 Years, the spring of those who return, and don't forget to like and subscribe, so you won't miss this 10-part journey of healing. Each chapter is a fragment of love, forgiveness, and the courage to return. There are summer afternoons in Montana when the sky turns gray like an old blanket. The wind sweeps across the wheat fields, carrying the scent of dry earth mixed with the promise of rain. People here say that rain always comes when you least expect it in this land, and it often brings a change no one is ready for. Stuart Stone's car made a short, strained sound before dying completely. He sat inside, listening to the wind whistle around the frame, the streetlights flickering faintly through the rain sheet. The downpour came simultaneously, as if someone had emptied the whole sky. The dirt road turned into thick mud, water splashing high against the windshield. He tried to restart the car, nothing. The screen flickered, then went dark. 10 years ago, if this had happened, he would have just called his assistant, and a helicopter would have come. But now, no one waited for his orders. It was just him, the rain, and the nameless road stretching through the open field. Through the flashes of distant lightning, he noticed a faint, small, steady light, like a lamp glowing behind the rain. A wooden house with a slanted roof stood behind a row of drenched maple trees. He grabbed his coat, opened the door, and stepped out. The wind whipped his face. The rain soaked him in seconds. Mud clung to his expensive shoes, cold and heavy. With every step, he felt himself walking out of one world, the world of steel, glass, and contracts, and into another, where there was only earth and thunder. The house grew clearer. Warm yellow light glowed from the porch. A woman stood there, still and calm. She wore a cotton robe, her wet hair falling around her face, a steaming mug in her hand. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet recognition, as if she'd seen him long before he appeared. "My car died," Stuart said, his voice half lost in the rain. "You're soaked to the bone," she replied softly, her voice a mix of Western drawl and something tender you couldn't quite name. "Come in, before it gets colder." He stepped onto the porch. The smell of coffee, damp wood, and fire met him like the memory of another life. Inside, the firelight danced across the walls. Old photos hung everywhere, family, harvests, a child on horseback. The house was small but warm, every corner alive. "Coffee?" she asked, setting her mug on the wooden table. "Thank you. I didn't think I'd find anyone out here. Willow Creek's kinder than it looks." She smiled, pouring him a cup. "You're just not used to our kind of rain yet." Stuart took the cup, his fingers trembling slightly from the warmth. He studied her light brown eyes, direct gaze, a small frame but steady, like a tree trunk. "You from the city?" she asked. "Seattle." "I thought so. You smell like the city perfume, fine coat, shoes that don't belong in mud." He laughed for the first time in months. "And you've lived here long?" "All my life. I'm Eliana Reed." Her name rang through the rain like a note. Eliana. The sound made the room seem quieter. The coffee was strong, a little burnt, but somehow perfect. They talked not like strangers, but like 2 people who might have known each other in another lifetime. She told him about her grandmother's farm, the harvest seasons, the skies that never looked the same twice. He spoke of city life, meeting rooms full of people but empty of feeling, a grand house with no one waiting inside. "You look tired," Eliana said, "but not the kind of tired work gives you. You're perceptive. People who've lost something important always carry that look." Stuart fell silent. Her words pierced straight through the armor he'd worn for years. The rain went on into the night. They sat by the fire, listening to the wind outside. Eliana curled up in her chair, her eyes soft but knowing. "Do you ever feel like you're living the wrong life?" she asked. "Every day." "Then why don't you stop?" "Because if I stop, I'm afraid nothing will be left. Sometimes nothing is exactly where you start being real." Her words stayed with him, like a spark catching somewhere he hadn't dared to touch. By morning, The rain had eased. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching on the droplets still clinging to the glass. He stood, his clothes dry from the fire, his heart damp with something unspoken. "I should go," he said quietly. "You can wait till the sun's fully out. I have work to do." She nodded, eyes drifting to the washed sky outside. As he approached the door, Eliana stood holding her mug, her gaze open and unguarded. "Will you come back?" Stuart looked at her, and the world went still for a moment. "I think I'll have to." In the days that followed, Stuart tried to forget. But each morning, pouring coffee in his high-rise apartment in Seattle, he thought of that small kitchen, the smell of coffee mixed with wood smoke, the woman who'd looked him straight in the eye and said what no one else dared. A week later, he drove back to Willow Creek. No reason, no plan, just a pull he couldn't ignore. Eliana was mowing the lawn. Hearing the engine, she looked up, squinting into the Sunday. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I said I would," Stuart replied, smiling lightly. From that day, he came often. At first, to bring supplies for the barn repairs, then to help her with the work, and to share simple lunches of cornbread and coffee. He learned to hold a hoe, drive a tractor, and clear weeds without ruining the roots. Eliana laughed more often, and sometimes, when he clumsily dropped a bucket of water, she burst out laughing, a sound that made every hardship vanish. At night, they sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. Moonlight fell across her hair, soft and silver. "Have you ever thought about what makes you happy?" she asked. "It used to be success, money. Now, I think it's here." "Here?" "Where the earth smells like rain, and you laugh." Eliana looked at him for a long time. The moon reflected in her eyes, as if she could see straight through him. Days passed like a slow melody. Stuart moved into a small cabin nearby, claiming it was for business convenience, though everyone knew better. The town began to whisper about the city man who fell for the farm girl. Eliana just smiled, unbothered. Stuart didn't care either. He felt he'd found the part of his life he'd lost. One afternoon, they walked along the fence behind the field, the sunset painting the wheat gold. Eliana pointed toward the distant tree line. "My grandmother's land stretches all the way there. I want to turn it into a real organic farm feeding the body and soul." "Then let's do it," Stuart said. "You make it sound so easy. It takes money, time. I have the money. You have the vision. We'll build it together." Eliana looked up, surprised. "You mean that?" "More than anything I've ever said." The wind carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Stuart kissed her for the first time in the golden light, slowly, tenderly, like a promise without words. Behind the old barn, they lay beneath a sky of stars that night. No music, no flowers, just the sound of insects and their shared breath. Eliana whispered as he held her close. "What are we doing?" "Living. For the first time, maybe," she murmured. After that, Stuart was no longer a visitor. He belonged, as if he always had. They planned the farm together, drew sketches, and chose seeds. He said he'd return to Seattle for a few days to arrange things, then return, for good. The morning he left, Eliana walked him to the gate. "You'll come back?" "I promise." She smiled, resting her hand on her belly, feeling the faintest stir of a new life she wasn't yet sure of. She meant to tell him but decided to wait until he returned. His car rolled down the dirt road, dust rising behind. Stuart waved out the window, eyes full of hope. Eliana watched until the car disappeared, her heart filled with quiet joy. She didn't know then that he wouldn't return this time. Not soon, at least. Outside, the clouds gathered again, and the rain began to fall softly, as if the sky itself was reminding her. Some happinesses only bloom long enough to be swept away. So, 10 years later, someone still has a reason to return and find them. On the first morning, Stuart returned to Willow Creek, and the sky was clear as crystal. Sunlight streamed through a thin veil of mist, spilling over barley fields that glowed like liquid honey. Everything was so still he could almost hear his heartbeat, steady, strange, and full of fear and life. Eliana was kneeling by the vegetable beds, her hands covered in soil. She looked up, squinting at the sunlight, and laughed. "I thought you were joking that day." "I keep my promises," Stuart said, removing his coat and setting down his bag. "City men who keep their word now, that's rare. Maybe they just haven't met anyone like you." Eliana smiled, brushing off her hands. "If you're staying, you'll have to work. No free coffee here." And so Stuart's day began. No more meetings, no polished conference tables, Instead, shovels, dirt, grass, sweat, and the crowing of chickens. He learned when to water, how to loosen the soil, and how to tell the scent of young grass from old. At first, he was hopeless. He held the shovel wrong, drenched his shoes, and spilled compost all over the ground. Eliana shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. You might be great at business, but you'd lose to an 8-year-old in tomato planting. Well, I'm starting over, he laughed. They worked side by side, shared lunch under the shade, listened to the old windmill creak. Sometimes, Eliana told stories about Grandma Martha, who always said, "The earth never betrays those who care for it." In the evenings, they sat on the porch, the air heavy with the scent of hay, the sunset burning red across the fields. Eliana propped her feet on the steps, biting into an apple. Don't you find it strange? A man who once built skyscrapers now tends to onion beds. No. For the first time, what I do actually feels real. You think you can stay here forever? I want to try. Willow Creek isn't as gentle as it looks. It's lonely, harsh, and can make people lose their way. You talk like you're the only one who can survive it. Maybe I am. She turned away, but Stuart caught that flicker in her eyes, something softer, like a quiet flame burning steady and deep. One afternoon, summer rain came out of nowhere. They took shelter in the barn, the smell of wet hay filling the air. Stuart pulled a tarp across the doorway while Eliana laughed, her hair plastered to her face. What did the city teach you about rain? She asked. That you should avoid it. Here, we see rain as a reward. A reward? Yes. It feeds the earth and sometimes makes people more honest. She looked at him. In that moment, Stuart wanted time to stop. There was no thunder or rain, just her eyes and his breath, slow and heavy. He leaned in. She didn't pull away. The kiss was brief, but enough for both to know something had begun, and stopping it would be impossible. They stood by the barn door when the rain cleared, watching sunlight break through the clouds. Eliana spoke softly. Some things won't take root if you plant them too late. And what about us? He asked. We'll see. After that, time moved like a slow film reel. In the mornings, there is coffee on the porch, Eliana reading the paper, and Stuart mucking out the stables. Afternoons working the fields, sweat soaking into the soil, sunlight burning across their backs. Evenings, simple dinners, quiet talks about small things, a flower blooming early, a bird nesting on the roof, a strange dream that lingered till dawn. Summer in Willow Creek was vivid and still. Every night, the sky bloomed with stars. Every morning, the wind hummed through the pines. For the first time in years, Stuart felt alive. One evening, Eliana spread out a land map, pointing to the edge of the property. I want to expand here, grow apples and lavender. It'd be beautiful. How much will it take? You sound like an investor. Maybe I am, he smiled. Investing in faith. Eliana fell silent. Something inside her shifted light, as dust floating through sunlight. In July, they went to the summer fair in town. Eliana wore a floral dress and a straw hat, her hair loose around her shoulders. Stuart wore a plain white shirt, simple but unmistakably city. As they walked side by side, every eye turned toward them. But he didn't care. He only looked at her as if the whole world fit within her outline. That night, when fireworks lit the sky, Stuart took her hand. I've never had a summer like this. You're living it right now. I want to live it forever. She turned to him, fireworks reflecting in her eyes. Don't say big words, Stuart. They scare people when they break. I'm not afraid. Really? He kissed her again, deeper this time because no words could hold their feelings. That night, beneath the shimmering sky, they rediscovered what it meant to belong to someone. Everything was straightforward, honest, and seemed endless. But every beautiful story has a pause, a quiet space where fate waits. One morning, Stuart's phone rang. His former assistant's voice came through. Mr. Stone, Mrs. Victoria needs you back in Seattle immediately. Emergency board meeting. The company's in serious trouble. Eliana stepped in and saw his expression change. Something wrong? Just work. I need to go back for a few days. How long? Not long. I'll be back soon. She nodded, but her eyes dimmed slightly. I won't stop you. But Stuart, not everyone waits forever. He took her hand. When I come back, we'll talk about the future. I want to be here with you. She smiled faintly. Then save those words for when you really return. That afternoon, Stuart left the farm. Eliana stood by the fence, wind tugging at her hair, sunlight cutting across her face. He glanced back and saw her hand resting on her stomach, a small, unconscious gesture he didn't understand. The car rolled down the dirt road, dust rising behind it. Eliana stood still, her heart swelling with something fragile, a mix of happiness, hope, and fear thin as smoke. She didn't know that from that moment on, fate had shifted course. Seattle was waiting with it, a choice that would end the most beautiful summer of their lives in silence. Eliana sat by the window, watching the golden fields fade as summer faded. It had been more than a month since Stuart left Willow Creek. Every morning, she unconsciously glanced toward the dirt road where his car had once disappeared. At first, it was hope, then silence, then emptiness. No messages, no calls, no letters. Just absence like he had never existed at all. But something inside her was changing. One morning, while washing dishes, the smell of coffee made her suddenly nauseous. For days, fatigue and dizziness followed, and then, with trembling hands, Eliana held a pregnancy test and saw 2 clear lines appear. A tear slid down her cheek. She couldn't tell if it was from joy or fear. That afternoon, she went to her grandmother's grave beneath the old willow tree. Lighting a candle, she whispered, "Grandma, I'm going to have a baby, but I don't know what to do." The wind stirred, rustling the willow's branches almost as if the sky was listening. When Grandma Martha was still alive, she had once told Eliana, holding her hand with her time-worn fingers, "Your child is a blessing, not a burden. Don't be afraid. The earth will help you." Eliana had held her close, tears soaking into silver hair. The months that followed were both lonely and miraculous. Her body changed gradually, and she could feel the quiet miracle growing inside her. By day, she worked watering, tending, talking to her belly like a small companion. By night, she lay awake, listening to the rain, thinking of Stuart, the man she didn't know whether to love still or finally let go. Whenever that thought came, she pulled the blanket tighter, as if it could hold the warmth slipping away. Winter came early that year. Martha grew weaker, unable to walk to the fields anymore. Eliana cared for her, her heart full of gratitude and dread. Her grandmother was the last pillar holding her world upright. One night, a fierce blizzard swept through the valley. Eliana woke to a sharp pain in her stomach. Her water had broken. Outside, the world was swallowed in white. No phone, no help, only the storm. Martha pushed herself up, gripping Eliana's hand. "Breathe, child. Slowly. I'm right here." All night, the cries and the storm intertwined, and when dawn broke, 2 newborn whales rose with the first light. Eliana looked at the tiny faces beside her 2 baby girls. One had dark hair like coal, and the other had pale, strange grey eyes. She whispered, "Welcome to the world, Olivia and Amelia." Martha smiled faintly and kissed their foreheads. Beautiful, like angels. Eliana looked out the window, the fields buried in snow, her heart swelling with something sacred and aching all at once. Months later, Stuart Stone appeared on the cover of a business magazine. In the photo, he stood tall in a tailored suit beside a woman in white, his new bride, Evelyn Whitmore, daughter of a powerful magnate. The headline read, "The Wedding of the Century, Stuart Stone and Evelyn Whitmore, the union of 2 empires." The newspaper came with her mail, tucked between bills and advertisements. Eliana stared at it for a long time, then quietly fed it to the fire. The flames caught quickly, light dancing across her expressionless face. "So that's the road you chose," she murmured. "And I'll take another." From that day, Eliana changed. She didn't cry. She didn't wait. She worked with everything she had. When spring came, she returned to the fields. Olivia was strapped to her chest, and Amelia was nestled in a basket nearby. She weeded, watered, and sang to them. Her sweat mixed with her tears, but her smile never faded. Grandma Martha passed away when the girls turned 3. Only a handful of neighbors attended the small funeral. Standing before the grave, Eliana held her daughter's hands and whispered, "Rest easy, Grandma. I'll keep this land. I'll raise them to be good." From then on, the name Reed Farm began to spread through Willow Creek. People saw a slender but unyielding woman working the soil by day, cooking by night, up again at dawn. Eliana asked for no help. She relied only on herself. She turned the small garden into an organic farm growing lavender, tomatoes, strawberries, and sold her produce at the town market. She taught her daughters to love the earth, mornings, and what they built with their hands. Each night before bed, Olivia would ask, "Mom, where's our dad?" Eliana would only smile. "Your father is a dreamer. One day, you'll know if you meet someone with eyes like yours." Amelia would frown. "We don't need a dad. We have you." Eliana kissed her forehead. "Maybe so, but I want you to know love isn't wrong, even when it ends." 10 years passed. Reed Farm became one of the most beautiful places in the valley. In summer, lavender painted the hills purple. In autumn, the wind scattered golden leaves across the porch. The three of them lived happily in their own way. Eliana no longer counted the days. She no longer looked down the dirt road leading to the highway. In her heart, Stuart Stone was nothing more than a shard of glass buried deep in the soil. Sometimes it caught the light, but it no longer cut her. Then, one June morning, as sunlight spilled across the young green fields, Eliana heard the sound of a car stopping at the gate. The engine's low hum strangely familiar. She looked up, hands still covered in dirt. A man stepped out, dark suit, silver in his hair, but the same eyes. A breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of lavender. She stood frozen, her heart pounding, whispering under her breath, "It can't be." But it was. Stuart Stone, the man she had loved, hated, and tried so hard to forget, was standing there in the morning light, looking at her with the eyes of someone who had been lost for far too long, and finally found his way home. That morning, the sky over Willow Creek was impossibly clear. Pale gold sunlight poured over the lavender fields just beginning to bloom, their scent soft and pure like the earth's quiet sigh. Eliana knelt among the rows, pulling weeds, her hands caked in mud, her mind at peace. She didn't know that the world she had protected for 10 long years would begin to tremble in just a few minutes. The sound of an engine echoed from afar. In this valley, it was rare no one drove luxury cars out to the edge of her farm. Eliana looked up. A sleek black car stopped at the white wooden gate, dust rising around it. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He stood there in the early light, sleeves rolled up, eyes grey as ash, the same eyes she once believed she would never see again. Eliana froze. Sunlight caught her face, revealing every line. Sun-browned cheeks, a faint sheen of sweat, calloused hands. She was no longer the girl she used to be, but his eyes, the look in them was the same. Recognition, shock, regret, and fear. "Hello, Eliana," Stuart said quietly, his voice low, slightly unsteady. She straightened, her tone cold as morning wind. "I thought you'd forgotten the way here." "Never," he replied, taking a step closer. "Stop." Her voice was sharp. "You don't have the right to set foot on this land." They faced each other across the wooden gate. Behind Eliana stretched the purple fields of lavender. Behind Stuart, the sunlit, dusty road, two worlds divided, one of peace, the other of guilt. He swallowed hard. "I know there's nothing I can say to undo the past, but I needed to see you. I needed—" "What?" she cut in. "Peace of mind. Forgiveness?" Stuart lowered his head, voice rough. "I needed to see that you're real, that you're still here." Eliana let out a short, bitter laugh. "You're seeing it, a woman of the earth, no longer the girl who once sat by your fire. And you, look at you, Stuart. A man so successful it's almost absurd, yet you look like someone who's lost everything that matters." He didn't argue. He only looked at her, eyes heavy as if the sky was pressing down. "You're married," she said, voice steady but cold. "Why come back? To see if I survived. You know I divorced 5 years ago." "No, I didn't, and I don't care." Eliana turned to go back to her flowers, but the sound of his footsteps followed. "Don't come closer," she warned. "Just 1 minute, Eliana, please." She turned sharply, fire in her eyes. 1 minute from you 10 years ago was enough to destroy my life." Silence. There was nothing left for him to defend. He looked at her hands, once soft as silk, now rough and strong. Her shoulders are slender but unbreakable. The woman standing before him no longer needed him. She wasn't fragile or broken. She stood steady in the storm, even though he had been the storm once. Then, from the porch, a small voice called out, "Mom, someone's at the gate." 2 little girls ran out, brown hair, bright eyes, cheeks flushed pink. Eliana froze. So did Stuart. One of them, the dark-haired one, had his eyes. For Stuart, time stopped. "Who are they?" he whispered. Eliana's voice was low, rough. "They're my daughters." "Your daughters?" "Yes. And mine, aren't they?" Eliana said nothing. Her silence was enough. She pushed the girls gently behind her. "Go inside, Olivia, Amelia." "But Mom." "Now." They hesitated, but their mother's firm gaze left no room for questions. They obeyed, though they kept glancing curiously at the stranger at the gate. When the door closed, Eliana turned back to him, her voice like a thin blade. "I don't want you near my children. They don't need to know who you are." Stuart's breath came uneven, pain twisting in his chest. "I didn't know, Eliana. I swear I didn't." "I believe you," she said, her tone laced with irony, "because if you had, you would have turned it into another deal to negotiate. Don't do this." "Do what?" "Tell the truth." The wind swept between them, carrying the heavy scent of lavender. They stood in silence. Stuart laid his hand on the wooden gate, eyes fixed on the house where two small faces had just disappeared. "How old are they?" he asked quietly. 9. "Twins?" "Yes." "God." He turned away, pressing a trembling hand to his face. 9 years. I missed 9 years. Eliana's voice was steady, but each word cut deep. "You missed more than that. You missed being a father. You missed the nights they had fevers, the first steps, the first words. You missed everything that makes a life real." His eyes filled with tears. "Let me try, Eliana. I'm not here to take anything away. I want to be near them, even as friends." "A friend?" She laughed softly, bitterly. "You can't be a friend to your own children, and you don't get to call yourself their father. I didn't know you were pregnant." "That's right. And I made sure you didn't, because I didn't want them growing up with a father who only showed up when he felt guilty or had time to remember that he cared. I was strong enough to carry the consequences for both of us." Stuart bowed his head. After a long pause, he murmured, "You're stronger than I ever was." "No, Stuart. I just learned how to survive." A lark flew past, its song breaking the silence fragile, like light over broken glass. He stepped back, his voice barely audible. "You can hate me forever, Eliana. I deserve that. But please, let me do something, anything, for them, work, help, whatever you'll allow." "No," she said firmly. "You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you forgiveness. If you want, you can stay in Willow Creek but never cross this fence." Then she turned and walked away, shoulders straight, head high. Stuart stood there, watching her disappear among the purple fields. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across her hair like a halo on a woman who had walked through hell without bowing her head. He sat down on the wooden step by the gate when she was gone. Slowly, he removed his wedding ring, the one he'd taken off long ago, and placed it on the ground. "I know," he whispered. "I've lost everything, but at least I won't leave again." The wind stirred, heavy with lavender, and from the window, 2 little girls watched, not understanding why their mother was crying in the sunlight. Stuart rented a small house on the edge of the Reed farm. It had been abandoned for years, grey wooden walls, a leaky roof, weeds choking the front steps. But to him, it was the only place he could stay close without crossing the line. He repaired every door by hand, painted the fence, patched the roof, and built a small flower trellis by the porch. The people of Willow Creek watched him working under the sun, puzzled. "Isn't that Mr. Stone, the millionaire from the magazine cover?" "Yeah. But now he's just a man learning to live here." Eliana knew he was there. She saw the thin curl of smoke rising from his chimney each morning, the silhouette of him out in the fields fixing fences or cutting grass. She didn't ask, didn't speak. Silence was her only shield, and she kept it firm. That summer came early. The lavender fields were ready for harvest. Eliana needed an extra pair of hands, and when Stuart offered, she said, "You want to work? Then work. But don't talk." He nodded. No words. Day after day, they worked side by side, just a few steps apart, yet worlds away. Eliana gave instructions. Stuart obeyed without question. When the sun was harsh, she brought him a water bottle and left it by a rock without a word. He drank it slowly, feeling the coolness slide down his throat and the quiet warmth of her unspoken gesture. At night, when Eliana took her daughters to the market in town, Stuart came to water the plants. He was careful, leaving no trace, only damp soil and flowers that never wilted. By morning, she would know someone had been there and that someone still cared. Eliana noticed, but said nothing. One evening, she saw him walking through the lavender rows, tall and still, the fading sun stretching his shadow long across the field. Something inside her trembled. Then she clenched her hands and whispered to herself, "Don't soften. He left once, and he'll go again if you let him." Stuart didn't hope for forgiveness. He only wanted to exist near them, to hear the laughter of the two girls echoing from the porch, to see Eliana walking by with her hair tousled in the morning light. One afternoon, while he was hammering fence posts, a voice called out, "Mister, need help?" He looked up. It was Olivia, the one with grey eyes just like his. Behind her stood Amelia, arms crossed, wary and protective. "Thanks, but I've got it," he said gently. "You look like someone I can't remember," Olivia said, tilting her head. "Maybe I just look like someone from your dreams." She giggled. "I dream a lot, but you have sad eyes, like Mom." Stuart froze momentarily, lowering his head to hide the ache in his chest. "Mom says you're the worker," Amelia asked, skeptical. "Not exactly. Just someone learning to grow flowers." "Flowers?" "Yes, because something about flowers reminds people they're still alive." The girls looked at each other and laughed. That day, they stayed to help him drive a few more posts. When Eliana came looking, she found the three of them sitting under an apple tree, sharing a bottle of water, sunlight spilling over their shoulders. For a moment, she stopped in her tracks. The scene, two small figures and one larger, their shadows crossing and merging, hit her like a forgotten memory. She turned away quickly, tears slipping down her face before she could stop them. Day by day, the silence between Eliana and Stuart became its own rhythm, neither closeness nor distance, just coexistence. Morning, they worked without words. Noon, he ate alone in his small house. She ate with the girls on the porch. Sometimes Olivia brought him a piece of bread, saying it was for energy, while Amelia pretended not to care but always watched from a distance. Then came a storm. Rain poured hard, flooding the lavender beds. Eliana rushed out to cover them, slipped, and fell into the ditch. Stuart saw and ran to her, pulling her up. They tumbled into each other, soaked and gasping. "You're still as stubborn as ever," she said softly, voice trembling between the drops. "And you're still just as hard-headed," he replied. They locked eyes. Lightning flashed across the grey sky, reflecting in Eliana's wet lashes. The world seemed to hold its breath. No rain, no wind, just that heartbeat of silence. "I'm sorry," Stuart whispered. "You've said that before," she murmured. "But it doesn't stop the rain." She stood, turned away, and walked back toward the house, leaving him alone in the storm. Rain poured harder, washing over him over the mud, over every last layer of pride he still had. That night, Eliana sat by the window, listening to the rain. The twins were asleep. She held a glass of wine, watching the fire flicker in the hearth, and thought of his eyes, the same eyes that once made her believe, then broke her completely. She didn't know what to call what she felt: anger, longing, or sorrow. Across the field, in his small house, Stuart couldn't sleep either. He sat at the table and wrote a letter. He didn't send it, just left it there. "Eliana, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but every morning I wake knowing I owe you gratitude for raising the most beautiful thing I've ever created. If you never let me into their lives, I'll understand. I'll still be here working the soil, tending the flowers, watching them grow from afar. Sometimes, seeing something good bloom from your own mistakes is enough." He folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Outside, the rain stopped, leaving only the chorus of frogs in the distance. The next morning, Eliana walked to the north fence and found it repaired, even the broken posts she hadn't mentioned. Beside it sat a small flower pot, and stuck in the soil was a wooden sign that read, "For a new season, for what still lives." She knelt, touching the damp earth. The scent of blossoms rose gently into the air, and in that quiet moment, the heart she thought had long turned to stone cracked just slightly, but enough for light to slip through. Autumn came early to Willow Creek. The sun still shone, but the wind already carried a hint of cold. The purple faded into gold on the lavender hills as the barley ripened under the soft light. The twins, Olivia and Amelia, were now 10, growing fast, hair down to their shoulders, full of laughter and questions. The older they got, the more peculiar their world seemed. Their mother never spoke about father, and the man who lived next door kept quietly helping every morning, yet never truly stepped into their home. "Uncle Stuart doesn't feel like a stranger," Olivia said one afternoon as they lay on the grass, watching clouds drift by. He looks at us like he already knows us. Amelia tossed a pine cone into the air. Mom says not to trust strangers, but he's not a stranger. Even our dog's happy to see him. Amelia turned to her sister, frowning. You're so naive, Olivia. Not everyone who smiles is good. Olivia's voice softened. But don't you think his eyes look like mine? That stopped Amelia. She looked into Olivia's clear grey eyes, unlike their mother's, and something flickered in her chest. They lay silent, listening to the wind hum through the fields. From that day on, Olivia started paying more attention to Stuart. When he came to fix the water pump, she'd stand at a distance, watching. He worked with quiet patience, never rushing, never complaining. When she came closer, he would always smile and say, "Careful, you'll get your hands dirty." "That's okay. I'm used to it," she'd reply, holding the pipe steady for him. He looked at her small hands, then smiled faintly, his voice catching, "Just like your mother's." From the window, Eliana watched, her heart tightening. That sight, the little brown-haired girl beside the man she'd once loved, filled her with warmth and dread. She knew she couldn't hide the truth forever, but she also wasn't ready to lose this fragile piece. That evening, as Eliana prepared dinner, Amelia asked bluntly, "Mom, why does Mr. Stuart live next to us?" "He helps me with work," Eliana said softly. "For years?" "No, only recently." Amelia studied her. "I don't believe you. You avoid him. Every time he's around, you freeze." "Why?" Eliana took a deep breath and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "Some things, I'll tell you when you're older. You always say that." Amelia turned away, frustrated. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She slipped out to the porch and found Stuart sitting in the garden, gazing at the stars. She crept closer and sat beside him. "You're not going home?" she asked. "I like the sky here. In the city, you can't see the stars anymore." "You lived in the city?" "I did. Why did you come here?" He paused. "Because there's someone I owe more than I can ever repay." Olivia looked at him, moonlight reflected in his eyes, grey and deep, like a still lake. "You know, your eyes look a lot like mine." Stuart froze. The wave of emotion that rose in him was almost unbearable. He managed a small smile and gently brushed her hair. "Maybe they do." The distance between Stuart and the girls slowly shrank in the days that followed. Olivia began visiting him openly, while Amelia, still guarded, started lingering nearby, listening more than she admitted. One morning, Eliana found Stuart showing the girls how to fix a bike chain. Olivia laughed freely, and even Amelia, pretending to be uninterested, couldn't hide her curiosity. "Mr. Stuart," Amelia asked, "what did you do in the city?" "I built houses." "Big ones? Like the ones in Seattle?" "Bigger than that." "So why are you here now?" He smiled gently. "Because I need to relearn how to build a house with real hands and heart." Amelia fell silent, her sharp eyes softening just a little. Stuart followed a few paces behind as Eliana walked through the fields that afternoon. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me stay." "I didn't let you," she replied. "You stayed on your own. But you didn't send me away. Why would I? The land is wide. The wind is free. I can't guard the whole sky." They said nothing more, but in the hush between them, something small began to melt, like the first crack in a wall of ice that had stood for 10 years. One evening, Olivia brought Stuart a small notebook. "I wrote a story. I want you to read it." He opened it carefully. The handwriting was uneven, and the words were simple. It was about a man who lost his family and spent the rest of his life trying to find them again. The last line read, "Sometimes, you don't need forgiveness. You need to be allowed to stay." Stuart closed the notebook, unable to speak. Olivia smiled. "I don't know how I came up with that, but I think it's true." He placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "You just wrote what I've been thinking for years." That night, Eliana read the notebook too. She sat for a long time in silence. In every clumsy line, she saw traces of Stuart, of herself. Everything she'd hidden, everything she'd avoided, now spilled out through the words of the child born from love and pain. He sat under the dim porch light again when she stepped onto the porch. "You made her write things she's never been told," Eliana said quietly. "It wasn't me," he replied. "Maybe she just wrote what she could feel." Eliana studied him. Her eyes, they look so much like yours. "I know," he said softly. "And Amelia, she's got my temper." He smiled faintly. "Makes me feel like we're both still somewhere in them." No, Stuart. She shook her head. They're their own people, not reflections of anyone. And I won't let the past hurt them we made. I understand, he said, voice low. But Eliana knew the truth couldn't stay buried. The moment children ask, truth finds its way through stories, glances, and the quiet things love leaves behind. One late autumn afternoon, Amelia climbed up to the attic, searching for old books. A cardboard box slipped from the shelf, scattering papers across the floor. Among them was a birth certificate, faded, but clear. Father, Stuart Alexander Stone. Amelia froze. Olivia came running up, picked up the paper, and read it silently. Their eyes met wide, shocked, and in that instant, both understood. Outside, the wind rose, scattering the last petals of lavender across the fading light. That afternoon, the wind howled strangely sharp and restless, carrying the chill of the coming winter storm. Two girls sat on the wooden floor surrounded by dust and old boxes in the small attic of the Reed farm. Between their trembling hands lay a single sheet of paper. Father, Stuart Alexander Stone. Olivia was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. Amelia, this is... It can't be, Amelia interrupted, clutching the paper tightly. It's some mistake. Mom wouldn't. But that's her handwriting. She could have written it for someone else. Or maybe it got mixed up. Olivia shook her head. No, remember what Mr. Stewart said. He used to live in Seattle. It's on the form too. Silence filled the attic. Outside, the wind battered the window panes, as if the world was trying to shatter the walls of silence Eliana had built for 10 long years. Amelia shot to her feet and hurried down the stairs, face pale. Eliana was in the kitchen, the warm smell of apple pie filling the room. She turned, smiling. What did you two find up there? Amelia held out the paper. Her voice trembled, sharp as glass. Is it true? Eliana froze. The color drained from her face as her eyes met the familiar lines on the page. Words failed her. She only gripped the towel in her hands until her knuckles went white. Olivia stepped forward, her tone gentler but shaking. Mom, is Stuart our father? A sudden gust slammed the window open. The golden kitchen dimmed into shadow. Eliana stood between her daughters, feeling time collapse 10 years folding in on itself, bringing her back to the night she'd stood between fear and choice. Yes, she whispered. He's your father. No one screamed. No one moved, only silence, heavy, final. Olivia's tears fell first, slow and soundless. Amelia turned away, her eyes red. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. Because I wanted you to grow up without the weight of our mistakes. The weight of your sadness, or his. Amelia shot back. Eliana swallowed hard. Both. Olivia's voice broke the quiet. Did he know? No. When I found out I was pregnant, he was already married. I chose silence. You chose silence. Amelia's voice cracked with anger. And what about us? You watched us ask for years. Who's our dad? And you just said, I'll tell you when you're older. Well, we're older now. Eliana didn't defend herself. She stood there, bearing it. Then Amelia turned and ran. She flung the door open and disappeared into the storm. Olivia started after her, but Eliana held her back. Let her go. She needs time. Out in the fields, the wind tore through the stubble and leaves. Amelia ran until her legs burned, until she stood before Stuart's small house. He was out front, cutting grass before the storm. When he saw her, he dropped the shears and hurried forward. Amelia? What's wrong? She held up the paper, shouting through the wind. Is it true? Are you my father? Stuart froze. Answer me. He stepped closer, voice trembling. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't anyone tell me? You both lied to me. His voice cracked. Because sometimes adults think hiding pain will protect their children. But they're wrong. Amelia backed away, tears spilling down her cheeks. I hate you. I hate both of you. You're cowards. She turned and ran. Stuart called after her, but the wind swallowed his voice. He sank to the steps, head in his hands, tears mixing with the cold rain that had just begun to fall. That night, Eliana searched the fields for her daughter. The rain had grown heavier, and the sky was a smear of grey. She finally found Amelia huddled under the old barn's roof, shivering. You're freezing, Eliana said softly, kneeling beside her. Don't touch me, Amelia whispered. You lied. Eliana stayed quiet. She wrapped her coat around the girl anyway, even as Amelia pushed her hands away. I'm sorry, she said. "I only wanted to protect you." "Protect me with lies?" "I was afraid," Eliana said, voice breaking. "Afraid you'd hate your father the way I once did." Amelia looked straight into her eyes. "Do you hate him?" Eliana was silent for a long time. "I did, but I also loved him. Both feelings lived inside me, and I never knew what to do with them." Amelia didn't reply. She leaned against her mother's shoulder, crying softly. "I don't want to be like you. I want to know the truth, even if it hurts." Eliana held her tighter as the rain poured down. When they finally returned home, Stuart stood on the porch, soaked through, with the birth certificate. His eyes were red. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have known sooner." "No," Eliana answered, voice weary but calm. "I should have told you sooner." Olivia ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, hesitant, but real. "I'm not mad. I just wanted to know who my father was. Now I do." Stuart knelt, hugging her close, tears spilling freely now. Eliana stood watching, hands hanging at her sides, her heart a tangled knot of pain and relief. Amelia lingered near the doorway, fists clenched. Stuart looked up at her and said softly, "I don't ask for forgiveness. I hope you'll let me stay to see you grow." Amelia's voice was stiff. "I'm not promising anything." "That's okay," he said. "I'll wait." She turned away, but Eliana saw her shoulders trembling. She knew there was no going back. The fragile peace they'd built on silence had shattered, and nothing would be the same. That night, the house was quiet. Eliana sat by the fire, watching the flames. Stuart stood outside under the eaves, rain dripping from his hair, eyes fixed on the dark, glistening fields. The space between them was no longer built from secrets, just truth, raw and painful. And somehow, it felt lighter. Inside, Eliana whispered to herself, "Maybe only when the truth breaks apart can we piece it together with something stronger." And out on the porch, Stuart closed his eyes, a sad smile on his lips. "At last," he murmured, listening to the rain. "The wind doesn't have to keep our words anymore." The storm left behind the scent of wet earth raw, alive and thin streaks of light cutting through a pale grey sky. That morning, Eliana woke to a different kind of silence. Not the silence of secrets, but of exhaustion after everything had finally been said. She turned toward her daughters, both asleep in the same bed, curled into each other like they used to as little girls. Under Amelia's closed eyes lingered faint traces of tears, while Olivia's hand clung tightly to her sister's, as if afraid that letting go meant losing her. Eliana sat by the edge of the bed and brushed their hair gently. "You know now," she whispered. "I just hope it doesn't make your hearts hard like mine once was." Outside, Stuart was already awake, walking the fields after the storm. A few fence posts had fallen, and the irrigation trenches were washed out. He knelt and pressed his palm into the damp, soft, steady soil. Eliana came out carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked up. "Thanks," he said quietly, taking one. "No need to thank me. We're all tired." "How are the girls?" Olivia slept well. Amelia still isn't speaking. They stood momentarily, listening to the breeze weave through the lavender that had survived the rain. "I know you're angry," Stuart said, "and you have every right. But still, thank you for letting them know the truth. No one should grow up in the dark, wondering who they are." Eliana's eyes drifted toward the young chestnut trees budding at the edge of the field. "I didn't tell them because I was afraid," she said softly. "Afraid they'd hate you, and afraid you'd come back and destroy the fragile peace I built out of pain." "I didn't come back to break anything," he said gently. "I came back to make something right, at least once." "Does it even matter anymore doing right now?" "Not for the past," he admitted, "but maybe for what's next." Eliana smiled sadly. "What's next belongs to them, Stuart, not to you or me. I know, but if they let me, I want to be part of it. Even just the part that teaches them how to plant, fix a bike, read the stars." She looked at him for a long time, then spoke quietly. "If you want to be their father, start by not discussing it. Just stay, day after day. They'll know who stays." He nodded. "I'll be here." In the weeks that followed, the Reed farm returned to its rhythm. Only now, no one hid behind silence. Words were fewer, but looks lingered longer. Amelia remained distant, but Eliana often caught her standing in the doorway, watching Stuart work. Olivia was different, open, curious, always near him with her sketchbook, asking about everything under the Sunday. Stuart was building a trellis one Saturday morning when Olivia ran up, holding a folded letter. "I wrote this," she said shyly. "I'm not sending it. I want to read it." "To whom?" "To my dad." Stuart froze. Olivia unfolded the paper, her voice trembling. "Dear Dad, I don't know how to call someone who's been missing all my life, so I'll say Dad. I'm not angry, just curious. When I look at you, I don't see a stranger. I see the part of me I never knew. If you want to stay, don't apologize anymore. I've heard enough promises. I need the truth, and your presence, even if it's quiet." Stuart couldn't speak. He bent down and touched her shoulder. "I'll stay," he whispered. That evening, Eliana walked into Amelia's room and found her writing. "What are you working on?" she asked. "A journal. Can I read it?" "No," Amelia said, then looked up. "But you can know what I wrote. I still haven't forgiven anyone today, but I don't feel like running anymore." Eliana smiled softly. "That's enough for now." Over the next month, Stuart became a quiet constant. He taught Olivia to use an old camera, helped Amelia test soil moisture, and repaired garden tools. Gradually, they spoke to him about minor things, then everything. Watching them, Eliana felt both warmth and ache. She had spent years guarding her daughters from him, and yet, here they were slowly learning to love the man she once lost. One late afternoon, Amelia brought out 2 cups of tea and set them before him. "Mom said you like ginger tea, right?" He looked up, surprised. Her eyes brown like Eliana's held steady. "Yes, it's not as good as Mom's, but if you're still here this winter, I'll get better." Stuart smiled, voice trembling. "I'll be here, even if the snow covers everything." Inside the house, Eliana overheard him. She leaned against the doorway, tears spilling freely, but they didn't fall from fear this time. They fell from release. She finally understood. The hardest thing wasn't forgiveness. It was believed that people could change even later. That night, the 4 of them sat around the small dining table. Olivia told stories from school. Amelia teased her mother for making salty soup, and Stuart listened, smiling quietly. No one mentioned the past. They didn't need to. Outside, the season's first snow began to fall soft and silent. The wind carried a faint chill, but the fire burned warm and steady inside. Eliana gazed out the window at the clear, starlit sky and thought to herself, after every storm, the earth grows softer. The heart may do too. Snow had been falling since dawn, blanketing Willow Creek in white. The rooftops of the small farms looked like frosted cakes under layers of cream. Stuart woke early and lit the fire. For years, this had been his ritual: coffee for himself, and another cup for Eliana, with a touch of milk but no sugar. Each morning felt like peace, like he no longer had to keep running. But today, a new sound broke the stillness, the slow crunch of tires on snow. He stepped onto the porch. A sleek black car stopped by the gate. The door opened, and time seemed to freeze. Mrs. Stone, his mother, the exact poised figure, tall, elegant, in a silver-grey fur coat and leather gloves. Her beauty remained, sharp as the frost she seemed to carry with her. It had been 10 years since they last met, the day he walked away from her empire and everything attached to it. She glanced around, her eyes finally settling on him. "Stuart, Mother, you look different, older. And you," he said quietly, "still bring winter wherever you go." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "May I come in?" He hesitated, then opened the door. "Come in. It's cold." Inside the small wooden house, she sat by the fire. The glow lit her face, still striking, still proud, but touched now by time and weariness. "What brings you here?" he asked. She removed her gloves and laid them neatly on the table. "To apologize." He let out a dry laugh. "That phrase I never thought I'd hear from you. I didn't know I was wrong before," she said quietly. "But then I got old and learned what loss sounds like." Her voice trembled slightly. "When I forced you to marry Whitney, I thought I was saving our family. I didn't see that I was killing my son. Now, everything I built is gone. The company belongs to others. Your father's house has been sold. My friends don't call anymore. All I have left is time long and silent enough for me to hear my regret." Stuart said nothing. He no longer felt anger, only a deep, aching compassion for the woman sitting before him, smaller than the one he remembered. "I know you have a family here," she said. "2 girls, and her. I came not to take anything back. I only want to ask, may I see them? Just once?" He looked down at his coffee. I don't know. They've had enough hurt. You don't trust me? I just don't think every wound needs to be reopened to heal. She stared out the window, where snow drifted softly like white ash. You're like your father, she murmured. When he was young, he left me too for love. I swore I'd never let my son grow up to be weak like that. And in doing so, I turned you into a man carrying the same scars. For the first time, he heard not command in her voice, but loneliness. This afternoon, he said, Eliana's taking the girls to the Christmas market. If you want to meet them, come with me. She nodded, tears shining. Thank you, Stuart. The town of Willow Creek looked like a painting that evening. Glowing lights strung over narrow streets, the scent of cinnamon and baked pies drifting from cafes, Christmas music humming softly in the air. Eliana walked hand in hand with her daughters through the snow, bundled in thick coats, cheeks flushed red. Olivia lingered at a bookstall. Amelia pretended disinterest, but kept glancing toward the towering tree in the square. It's taller than last year, Amelia said. And brighter, Olivia added. Eliana smiled. That's because the snow's heavier, and people want to feel warmer. A familiar voice came from behind. I think this year's warmer than last. She turned. Stuart stood beside him, a woman whose elegance seemed to still the air around her. Eliana froze. That's my mother, Stuart said quietly. The crowded street suddenly felt small. Amelia tightened her grip on Eliana's hand. Olivia looked around, uncertain. Mrs. Stone took a careful step forward. Her voice was softer than Eliana had ever imagined. Hello, my dears. Eliana's tone was calm. What are you doing here? To apologize, the older woman said. For everything. Eliana stared, startled by the tremor in her voice. I hurt my son, Mrs. Stone continued. And because of that, I hurt you and these children. I don't expect forgiveness. I want to see them. Olivia, shy but brave, stepped closer. I'm Olivia. Mrs. Stone smiled through tears. You're beautiful. You look like your mother. Amelia stood back, wary. Mrs. Stone crouched slightly, her voice gentle. And you must be Amelia. Such a strong name. Was it your grandmother's? Amelia frowned. You know my name? I know both of you, she said softly. I've seen every photograph your father sent. I just never dared to come until now. Eliana turned to Stuart, confusion and memory warring in her eyes. He said nothing, only gave a slight nod that said, I didn't plan this. I just let the past find its own way here. After a long pause, Amelia asked, Do you regret it? Mrs. Stone met her gaze. Every day. So what will you do about it? I can't ask to be loved, she said, but I can try to make amends by helping, listening, doing anything that might ease the weight I caused. Amelia hesitated, then nodded slightly. I don't promise to like you, but if you help Mom, she won't be so tired. Eliana looked from her daughter to the woman who had once taken everything from her. You know, she said quietly, I don't need your apology for myself, but if you truly mean what you say, then love them. Love these girls with whatever years you have left. Mrs. Stone's tears fell freely. I will, I promise. The snow thickened above them. Under the golden Christmas lights, 4 figures stood still, 3 generations bound not by perfection, but by the fragile courage of forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Stone stayed in Willow Creek. Not long enough to learn how to bake pumpkin pie, water lavender, and listen without speaking. Eliana didn't forgive her, but she still made her a cup of tea every morning. Amelia never called her grandma, but whispered goodnight each evening. Olivia began a new story, titled The House in the Snow. One night, Stuart watched them, all 3 women at the same table, 3 faces shaped by strength and loss, and realized that this winter wasn't cold anymore. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, he believed that what was lost could be replaced, not with what once was, but with something gentler, truer. Not perfect, but lasting. Outside, snow fell slowly. Golden light spilled from the cabin window, and laughter filled the air, soft, human, and whole. It was the sound of a life rebuilt, the sound Stuart Stone had spent a lifetime searching for. Winter faded slowly, leaving behind the last traces of snow melting on the farmhouse roof. Willow Creek eased into spring, not the dazzling kind found in cities, but a gentle one, fragrant with lavender and damp soil, alive with the songs of birds returning to the chestnut trees. Eliana rose early. She stepped out to the porch where the flowers she'd planted at the end of winter were blooming, soft, pale purple. Stuart was sawing wood by the fence. Olivia sat beneath a tree sketching. Amelia adjusted the irrigation system she and her father had fixed the week before. She stopped for a moment, watching them. Everything looked simple, almost ordinary, yet she heard the quiet heartbeat of something she once thought was gone forever within that ordinariness. "Coffee," she said, placing 2 cups on the table. Stuart looked up and smiled. His smile wasn't like the one from 10 years ago, no longer proud or careless, but the kind born of loss and understanding, of a man who'd learned to greet each new morning with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. Eliana sat down, her gaze lingering on his hands, rough, sunburnt, steady. Hands that once signed contracts now knew how to hold the earth. And somehow, that brought her peace. "Mama," Olivia ran up, holding out a sheet of paper. "I finished my story." Eliana took it, reading softly. "Once, a man thought he could buy happiness with sacrifice. He went far away, and it took him many years to learn that love didn't need to be grand. It only needed a home and someone willing to stay. In the end, he came back. Not with riches, but with his hands and a promise never to leave again. And because he kept that promise, spring returned." Eliana folded the page carefully and handed it back. "It's beautiful, Liv," Olivia smiled. "I just wrote what I see." "And what do you see?" "I see Dad here every morning." Eliana turned toward Stuart. His head was bowed, eyes glistening. By March, Mrs. Stone had moved into the town for good. She was no longer the woman of the corporation, but simply an old lady with silver hair, tending flowers and telling stories to her granddaughters. Eliana sometimes came by to help, not warmly, but without distance, just enough space to let the past stay where it belonged. Amelia, too, had softened. She often followed Stuart into the fields, asking about planting, water levels, and the language of the wind. "Mom said you used to be good at running things," Amelia said one morning. "Is this different?" "Completely," Stuart chuckled. "Back then, I thought the world had to be controlled. Now I'm just learning to live with it. And Mom, your mum's better at that than anyone I know. She doesn't try to control life. She tends to it, and because of that, everything around her grows." Amelia smiled faintly, storing the words somewhere deep inside. That afternoon, Eliana stepped onto the porch. Stuart was fixing the flower trellis. She approached with a small basket of seeds. "Planting more?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Feels like the ground's finally soft enough." She set the basket down. "These are sunflower seeds. You used to like them. I kept a few packets." He smiled. 10 years, and you still remember? "Some things," she said quietly, "refuse to be forgotten. They stay in the soil." She knelt beside him. Their hands met briefly in the warm earth. They stayed that way for a moment, no words, just wind and birdsong. Finally, Eliana whispered, "I don't know what we are now, Stuart. Not old lovers, not quite friends." "I don't need a name," he said. "It's enough that we're here together, every day." Her eyes softened, the way ice gives way to a thawing stream. "Maybe. This is enough," she said. That evening, the 4 of them sat around the table. Mrs. Stone told stories. The girls laughed. Eliana poured apple cider into Stuart's glass. He looked at her and said quietly, "I used to think happiness was something you had to chase. Turns out, it was right where I left it." Eliana smiled. "Sometimes you must go far to realize you were standing in the right place all along." Outside, the sky turned orange with sunset, washing over the fields of new lavender. Stuart held his daughter's hands. Eliana stood beside him, her hair catching the breeze. They stood there, 4 figures in the soft light of spring, the 10th spring since the day he'd left. No promises, no fairy tale endings, just a family imperfect, but whole in their own way. A man who learned how to stay, a woman who learned how to trust again, and 2 children who learned that love is never perfect, but always possible to begin anew. Beneath their feet, sunflower seeds began to stir, and somewhere in the whispering wind, a voice seemed to say, "Some people spend a lifetime finding their way back, but spring will always wait for those who genuinely want to return." After 10 long years, they had finally come home, not to the past, but to one another, through understanding. Because sometimes, the most beautiful part of love is not where it begins, but in the moment, the 2 people still choose to stay. After knowing everything is imperfect about each other, Thank you for listening to the end of this journey. If this story warmed you, if there's someone you've remembered, forgiven, or hope to return to share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe so that we can meet again in the following story, where love isn't just told, but lived, one word at a time.